The environmental left has been frantically trying to push the notion that man is the cause of environmental chaos. They called it global warming until the data showed we've been in a cooling period since 1998. Then they called it climate change, but that didn't have enough shock value, so change became destruction. Regardless of the title, every one of these themes was selling the notion that man-made carbon dioxide was destroying the environment. Let's have a refresher on something you may not have seen since junior high. Nitrogen and oxygen make up 99% of our atmosphere, and no amount of screaming by the climate crowd can change the math. This means the scourge of climate change must be launched inside the footprint that is less than 1% of Earth's atmosphere. Let's look at some definitions. Agenda. And now, science. Now judge which is being applied when it comes to the climate crowd. There are three pillars to the climate crowd's well-intentioned but blindly misguided argument. 1. Carbon dioxide is the source of the problem. 2. Man's production of CO2 is at the root. And 3. 97% of all climate experts agree that man is causing global warming. That's fine until you get to the facts. Two researchers from the University of Illinois authored the Duran paper, a survey that asked if man is causing global warming. They started by ignoring all of the solar scientists, physicists, and meteorologists in the world, invited over 10,000 scientists, and got over 3,100 respondents. Because this exercise was meant to show a result they wanted to promote, the survey ignored all but 77 respondents, 75 who parroted their premise, plus 2 others. Now you can see that the 97% was nothing more than the math being twisted to support an agenda. The Duran paper is the basis for every claim that asserts that, quote, the science has been settled, unquote, but it propagates the biggest environmental lie since the world was declared flat. Let's explore how an agenda could impact a scientific study. Say we're trying to estimate the snow removal budget for Boston, but we think salt is evil and its use should be minimized by any means. Cities typically spread 250 pounds of salt per lane per mile, so snow volume is the sole driver on how much salt is needed. Let's look at the historic snowfall totals for Boston from 1890 to 2012. Since we have an agenda of minimizing the salt we put down, we're going to ignore snowfall amounts for December through February. Now we only need to buy enough salt to handle 5 inches of annual snowfall. Agenda accomplished, but ask yourself, is there any mathematical equation that could convince anyone that Boston gets 5 inches of snow per year? That Boston snowfall example seemed pretty absurd. Who would buy an argument that Boston gets 5 inches of snow a year when the math purposely deleted 89% of the mass that we all know exists? We've been told for years that CO2 is destroying our environment and it's man's fault. And now you can see the Department of Energy chart that shows CO2 comprises over 99% of all greenhouse gases. No wonder the climate crowd is so concerned about CO2. But wait, what does this line "except water vapor" mean? Here is another DOE chart that includes water vapor, which comprises 95% of all greenhouse gases. Are you kidding? The Department of Energy keeps different charts, with and without water vapor, by far the most abundant greenhouse gas. CO2 is a tiny fraction of what the climate crowd is telling us, and the man-made contribution of CO2 is 0.117%. Is this some kind of joke? This chart is from the website Search and Discovery, an industry site for geoscientists, and it shows all greenhouse gas contributions by type: water vapor, biologic, and man-made. The total man-made contribution of all greenhouse gases is 0.28%, but the climate crowd wants the world to believe CO2 is destroying the world and man is the cause. You can find this chart at this link above. This means that the man-made contribution to all greenhouse gases is less than 1 1/3 of 1% inside an area that occupies a 1% sliver of Earth's atmosphere. This has to be some kind of mistake, right? The government wouldn't willfully mislead the public on something as important as climate change, would they? Here is the website from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, which can be found at this link. It appears they segment greenhouse gases in two groups, those that are counted and not counted in emission estimates. Evil CO2 is listed at the top of gases that are counted, and here is the smoking gun. Water vapor is officially ignored by the U.S. and international climate hawks. They expose their agenda by admitting the most abundant greenhouse gas is ignored in emission measurement. When you begin with an agenda, all of your math must be contorted to fit your narrative. The climate crowd went all in that man caused climate change, so they had no choice but to ignore all greenhouse gases that man doesn't create. The coffin was nailed shut on the climate crowd's position by two luminaries who were once champions of the environmental movement. Greenpeace co-founder Dr. Patrick Moore, who authored Confessions of a Greenpeace Dropout, left the organization when he realized that science was being hijacked in favor of politically motivated activism, reflected in this quote. Dr. Fritz Varenholt, one of Germany's leading voices on the environment, debunked man-made climate change with his book, The Cold Sun. His criticism was slightly more harsh than Dr. Moore's. Weather Channel founder John Coleman had been a vocal critic of climate change, but the media ironically ignores his opinions. Forget politics and personal beliefs for a moment, and ask yourself what is more maddening. Being fed an epic lie for decades, or being expected to ignore it now that you know the truth?